Well, welcome everybody. We're just so happy to have so many of you here today, and welcome to the youth. I'm Kathy Zarling, one of your two parish nurses here at Redeemer, and it's just my great pleasure to introduce Molly and Tim to you today. Our topic for today is addiction, mental health, and the power of connection. And we've got two very well-versed counselors to share that with us. Molly is a good friend and colleague of mine in the Mayo Nicotine Center, and she is a nicotine dependence counselor at Mayo Clinic. She earned her master's degree in clinical counseling from Winona State University, and she's a licensed alcohol and drug counselor and licensed professional clinical counselor in the state of Minnesota, as well as being nationally certified as a tobacco treatment specialist. She's worked with children, adolescents, and adults with mental health, behavioral, substance abuse, and developmental issues in both residential and outpatient treatment settings, both in Wisconsin and Minnesota. She has a special interest in polysubstance use, particularly with tobacco and the interactions among the different substance abuses and the effect on recovery. Tim Volz, we're always also happy to have, and I don't know him quite as well, but it's just great to have you, Tim.
I just met you.
Well, I know. Well, you didn't have to tell him that. I know this much about you. Tim is the owner of a new company here in Rochester called No One, LLC, and it's been in operation for over 2 years. He runs 6 groups weekly, and he also does individual therapy sessions and family programming and counseling. He's worked in the field of substance abuse disorders and mental health for the past 15 years. He's a licensed professional clinical counselor and licensed alcohol and drug counselor, and he has authored 2 books in the past 3 years. And just a little footnote, he didn't want to bring the books today, he didn't want to market books, but he does have them available. They're available on Amazon, but for anybody that attended today can get them at 50% off. So if you think you want one, we just have to contact him. And Tim's been sober for over 18 years, and he tries to apply his clinical knowledge with his lived experience of life. So we're so pleased to have both of them. Yeah. And when you have questions, please speak up, because we're taping this to put on the website, and we'll have time to address everybody's questions. Thank you.
All right, well, welcome. Thank you guys for coming. I guess I'll just start it off, and we're going to just talk a little bit about, addiction. Tim's going to talk a lot about what he does in the power of connecting with people, especially like in person. But I wanted to give you a little bit of a background on addiction in general. I don't know how many of you guys know how addiction works. Sort of, a little bit. Okay. All right. Well, we'll just do a little bit of an overview. Let's go back. These are the objectives that we're going to talk about today. So, picture of the brain. Addiction takes place in the middle of the brain. This is called the ventral tegmental area and the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is where you make all your decisions. But when you get addicted, this is like the middle of the brain. This is your survival area, basically. This is like food, sexual experiences, anything where it releases that dopamine, and it tells your frontal lobe and your emotional brain, I want this, I need this, right? So a lot of times people think that, why don't people just stop? Why don't people just stop using? It's causing all these problems. But this is because this part of the brain in the middle has been hijacked. And now the drug has taken over, and people think that I need this. I need this drug more than anything, because the survival area is what, and your brain thinks you're basically trying to kill it if you don't have that drug. But people do recover, but what they have to do is they have to go through a period of withdrawal away from that drug. Those extra receptors that are activated by that drug, they downregulate, but they do not go away. And that's why relapse can happen too. The memory of it never goes away. It just gets a little bit lessened. The urge gets lessened over the years. Like Tim here's been 18 years sober. He doesn't probably have much of a desire, but it still never goes away, the thought of wanting to use. And you have to work at it your whole life. So this is the reason why people don't just stop, and this is the reason that relapse happens. So basically we have a hedonic set point in our brains, and this regulates our dopamine levels. And so when something good happens, we release dopamine, and then it comes back down again, and we kind of just go like this. When you ingest a drug into your body that is a narcotic, so basically alcohol, opiates, stimulants like cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, marijuana, alcohol, nicotine, all of those drugs release dopamine. And so when you're taking these drugs in higher amounts than what your brain is meant to take in, your brain shoots up a lot of dopamine, and then it releases a drug called glutamate to help bring it back down again. Well, over time, the brain thinks that you need that drug in order to survive because you just keep on spiking it like this, and it resets this point. Over time, when you're using these drugs over and over and over again, the brain doesn't operate well and you don't feel good without the use of the drugs. The good news is that this hedonic set point can become normalized somewhat again, but it can take some time, anywhere from a few months to years, depending on the drug and how much you use. Yeah?
Real quick, can't hear you very well back here.
Yeah.
I think there's a blowing going on.
There's a blowing, yeah,
Something,
sorry, and I'm
that's
like
okay.
just getting over a little bit of a cold, so,
Okay.
yeah.
So I'll just jump in really quick right here. I talk really loud, so you won't have any problem
Very
hearing me.
loud, yeah.
So they call addiction a chronic relapsing brain disease.
Yeah.
So it is a brain disease, and the American Medical Association, called alcoholism, drug addiction.
Yep.
They defined this as a disease in the 50s. Okay, so going back to that point, just to make it kind of understandable for you guys. So when you're hungry and you walk by a grill and there's some steaks on the grill, it releases a little squirt of dopamine that says, I'm gonna get one of those, right? But when you take in any drug or alcohol, especially methamphetamine, and you'll see a slide later, that releases about 1,000 times as much dopamine as a little squirt that you get walking by a grill when you're hungry. So when you get that and you first ingest that or shoot that or snort that or eat that drug, especially when you come to stimulants, it gives such an unnatural release of dopamine. You've never felt that before, and it's this huge rush. And then that becomes something that you chase. And that's how you can go from, there's like this invisible line that you cross, and you'll see that when you get to the Jelinek curve. And I'll just pass this back to Molly because I can talk forever on this. But for people that don't have the ism of alcoholism, which is about 90% of people, they will have somewhat of a consequence. Like let's say you go to college and you're at a party, frat party, some kind of a party, and you have a consequence, whether it's a disorderly conduct or you get a driving while intoxicated or something like that. Most people will stop because it's, that's not a good thing for me to do. They'll stop. But 10% of those people that have reached that mecca of, when you take that drug in, it just continues to go on and on and on. And then you build tolerance.
Yep.
So your brain, like Molly said, your brain just becomes normalized to the point where it wants that and it wants that. So I work with a lot of couples, and I work with a lot of people in child protection, and a lot of people on probation, and a lot of people on parole. And I would put a bottle of alcohol, I don't do this literally, but I would say there's a bottle of alcohol here and your children are right here. What would you pick? Well, 100 times out of 100, they're going to pick their kids. But that's not what their brain is saying. So when you see these people go back out there and lose their children and then have a tough time getting it back, it's this irregulation. The furniture's been rearranged per se. And Molly said it takes time, and that's why I work with people long term, and we'll get to that later. But I just wanted to throw that in there to give you an idea about the dopamine release that you get from this unnatural chemical that goes into your brain. Right. So just so you can understand a little bit how the progression works. It starts with that first blast, and then people chase that until they pretty much lose everything. Unless there's interventions, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too.
Yeah, which is a good lead-in for the youth here too. When you start using these drugs, at a young age. Can you hear me okay? Is that better? Okay. When you start using these drugs at a young age, it changes your brain. So did anybody see that movie Inside Out? Yes? Yeah? So on the left there is a scene from the movie Inside Out where this is your memory bank, right? So your memories. And when you are about age 12, your brain starts to purge those things that you're not using anymore. This is why that show, Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? Do you know why they chose fifth graders? Because you're really smart in fifth grade. Yes. Yeah. So what happens then, though, as you enter puberty is that you start to get rid of stuff that you're not using. So it's kind of that use it or lose it, use it and fuse it. So you get better with things that you practice at, right? When you start using narcotic drugs at a young age, your brain rearranges those pathways and it becomes like a permanent pathway, and your brain kind of evolves around that drug, and it becomes a lot more difficult to get, to stop using, and you get addicted a lot faster when you're a kid. It's kind of like if you have a keyboard and it's like all the keys are mismatched and not where they're supposed to be. You don't know where to put your hands, right? So when you're an adult and you use, if you haven't used, like the brain kind of knows how to put those keys back to where they're at. But if you're an adolescent, your brain is still developing, those keys can stay mismatched. And your brain can rearrange itself to where it's, to how that's supposed to be. That's how it thinks it's supposed to be, and it makes it a lot harder. That's why when I work with people that smoke, since they're a little kid, it becomes much, much harder as they get older to stop smoking because their brain has evolved around that drug for 50 years.
And that's their ingrained neural pathway. That's their main neural pathway. And it's really, really easy to fall back into that neural pathway. I always look at it like this. Don't do this at home, but like an apple core right down here. And that becomes this huge neural pathway after using for 25, 30 years, whether it's smoking or anything else. And as you're trying to build new neural pathways and do things differently, it's so easy to fall back into that old neural pathway, especially when there's stressors in your life and everything else, because that's where that fight or flight comes in. That amygdala, that picture of that brain she showed you right off the bat there, that amygdala is fight or flight. So when something happens, and I'm in active addiction, and I'm trying to get sober, and something happens to me in my sobriety, my brain immediately goes back to that. I know what's going to give me some relief from this. And that's the fight that you have in that first 6 months to a year of sobriety, is fighting that old neural pathway as you're gaining these small new ones that, again, will get bigger in time.
Yeah. And I just wanted to throw in a couple of slides about e-cigarettes because I knew there was going to be some kids here too. And this is the drug that is like probably the most prevalent besides alcohol and marijuana in the schools, right? And there's a lot of kids that are in middle school that are using e-cigarettes. And just, talking about a lot of times the misperception that it's okay, right? It's not as harmful, it's no big deal. But I talk to a lot of kids who get hooked on the e-cigarettes very, very quickly, within a few weeks, and then they can't get off of it because the e-cigarettes are designed to release a lot of dopamine very, very quickly, and just as much as a cigarette, if not more, right? And there's a lot of harmful chemicals, and I've seen kids with like coughing and wheezing and hard to breathe. They've had to drop out of sports. They can't do things that they normally would do because of them. So, I mean, it's just like, being very, very careful about, like when someone offers you this and it's not a big deal, like it doesn't take very long to get hooked on it at all. And even just being around it, people think it's not a big deal because it doesn't smell bad like cigarettes do. But there's a lot of chemicals in the secondhand aerosol as well. And I know my daughter, she's a runner, and she was in college, and she was like complaining because all the dorms were filled with aerosol from the e-cigarettes, and she was like, she could feel it. And I said, well, can you get away from it? And she said, I'd have to leave my dorm, So it's problematic, and it's not harmful to be around it, but especially if you've got asthma or any bronchitis or bronchial symptoms like compromised lung function, it can be dangerous. All right, you want to talk about this?
Well, yeah, well, I'll talk about this briefly. I kind of already did, but these are just kind of like the different dopamine release that you get from different drugs. So when you look at nicotine and ethanol, which is your alcohol, morphine, and cocaine, you can see that that releases a really, really large amount. But then you see the amphetamines, and when you see the numbers over here, it's probably hard to see those. You can see that that's 1,100 nanograms right there, which is really, again, that unnatural release. And when I work with methamphetamine addicts that are trying to get in recovery, it's extremely difficult for them to manage that first year of sobriety, because what happens is once you take this chemical away and all that unnatural release of dopamine that you've been getting for years, you don't feel anything. They call that anhedonia. Anhedonia is the lack of pleasure in anything that you normally would get pleasure from. So it's a beautiful day outside, so I like to golf. But if I was in early recovery from that, it would seem like more of a chore for me, because your brain, again, is used to taking all of this dopamine in, and now you're getting just a tiny little squirt of dopamine instead of this huge monster shot of dopamine that you get in from any kind of amphetamine, especially methamphetamine. And so working with those folks, again, they struggle in that first year with not feeling anything, and that's really hard to do for a year straight. And I've seen people struggle and then go back out there ultimately, because they know that at least they can get some relief from going back. And that's the problem that you have with these short-term places that take somebody in for treatment, 28 days for inpatient or a 3-month outpatient. It gives you about 1% of what you need. Stabilization and some education. Kind of what you're getting today is some education. That's all they get. And then maybe, go to this place when you get back home. But a lot of them go back to the same environment and they don't have a chance. When I was working with adolescents, so I'm a school teacher by trade, until I ended up drinking on those days that ended in Y and ended up losing my teaching job, and rightly so. But working at an adolescent treatment center, I saw a lot of the kids come in, and their brains are still forming. They're still growing and forming till they're 26 years old. And what I found is it's like you work with them for 60 to 90 days if insurance will let you do that, but they go right back home to the same environment that they came from, which defeats all of the purpose of getting them, to level up and do different things. And all of a sudden they're going back home, and it's usually, not always, but usually the parents. The parents are a lot of the reason that these kids grow up and start to drink, and because there's alcohol in the house, or there's no solid parenting, so they can go out and do whatever they want to do, and then they get in with the wrong group of kids, and pretty soon it's just game on. So I've had a lot of experiences with parents coming in, and they would roll joints for their kids. This was back before marijuana was legal, but it's still illegal for kids anyway. They'd roll joints and put them on the dresser, and then they'd go off to work and say to their 15-year-old daughter, "There's your 2 joints for the day." It's heartbreaking to work with children and adolescents when they're going back to an unhealthy home environment. So basically the goal for me was plant seeds, and plant seeds and try to give them enough education and enough unconditional love from a therapist point of view, so they know that there's help when they go back home if they need it again.
Right. And even if they're going back to a healthy environment, like if the parents aren't using, usually the parents don't have any idea of like what to do and how to help, or like grandparents or family members, so this is like what Tim does, a lot of family groups, because the family is also struggling with the person that's addicted.
Family disease, family recovery. Because sometimes the family members are sicker than the person that's in programming trying to get better, because they don't know what to do. So I do those about every 6 weeks on a Saturday morning from 9 to 12, where I have the family members come in for the first hour and a half, and then I just kind of meld or bring in the people I'm working with for the last hour, and it's amazing what goes on in those first 90 minutes. All the questions, all of the, what do I do about this? What do I do about this? And it's very, very healthy for them to learn healthy boundaries and learning how to detach and learning how to get help for themselves, whether it's Al-Anon or, you know, other community programs where they can go get the help they need so they don't have to be so sick. Because, you know, the addict just gets to use. And we're the ones that, you know, the family members are the ones that have to pick up the pieces time and time again. I got a good story for you. It's actually a sad story, but it's pretty relevant. So I was working with a guy, started working with him in 2012, and worked with him for about 10 years. And he was sober I saw him get his 2-year medallion, 2 years of sobriety. And he went out and relapsed one time, and of course fentanyl's out there. I'm not even going to get into that, but it kills you fast. And he died. And I went to the wake and talked to his mom and dad because I knew them. And they said, you know, for 20 years, every day we wondered and we were scared, not knowing if he was going to die or whether he was using or whatever. And then he got sober, and then we didn't worry as much. And that's why this hit them so hard, is because they spent 20 years worrying about their son. And then finally he got sober and sustained it, and they started to get a little relief. And then all of a sudden, boom, he's gone. So it's definitely important to get the family involved in this.
Yes, for sure.
All right, I'm not a big PowerPoint slide guy, but I'll tell you a little bit about the Jelinek curve. So this Jelinek curve, basically what happens is it starts up here with occasional relief drinking or just some kind of drinking, you know, drinking at a party, you know, freshman in college, you know, got to try it, right? And then as you go down here, you see there's all of these consequences. You know, and so for most people, they'll be up here and they'll have, let's say, some, you know, urgency of first drinks, relief drinking commences, and they're starting this path, and then they'll have a consequence, and they'll stop. But the people that have the ism, that just love it, they'll wait until it goes all the way down here, and then basically one of two things happen. They'll go to the bitter end and die, or they'll accept help. And by this time they've lost everything. That's when I get them. I get them right down here at the bottom, where you get to this chronic phase, where the family's gone. You basically your whole peer group is spent on drinking. So I went to the North Star for years, you know, and that was my group. You know what I mean? I drank at the North Star for years, and that was lengthy intoxications, impaired thinking, an obsession with drinking, which becomes a daily thing. So this is where the progression of addiction happens, and that's where the brain disease really struggles. So all of these consequences, and then you get down here, and then there's this kind of either a moment of clarity, where you're like, I need to get some help, you know, or they just say, well, I've done it for this long, I think I'm just going to continue on. If you do decide to get help, then this is the road to recovery. And there's a lot of stuff in here. What they don't have in here, because this is an older curve, is they don't have the mental health stuff in here. And every single person that I work with that has a substance use disorder has a mental health disorder, whether it's depression, anxiety, ADHD, lots of trauma with adolescents, lots of trauma. And those are the big four for me. PTSD, ADHD, depression, and anxiety. Even if it's an acute stressor, which is just something you know, that happens really quickly, like a death in the family or something like that. And then so they start to go in here, we see group therapy, we see a physical overhaul by the doctor, maybe they get on medication like naltrexone, which helps for cravings, and then they get up here, and then they get to that, you know, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you got your basic stuff on the bottom. On the top is self-actualization, where you get up to the top here, and mutual help and increasing tolerance. I'm 19 years sober, and I still have a sponsor I meet with every week. I still go to a home group meeting every week. You know, I still exercise 5 times a week. I do all of the things that I did way back then. I just do less of them because I'm living my life today. So I am up in this area, but I started down here. Obsessive drinking continues in vicious cycles, which leaves family members just absolutely devastated. And so that's when I get them. And that's why the family is so important to this whole thing. I get them usually when they're at their bottom, because they were not able to stop up here when they still could. And they cross that line from abuse or mild use disorder to severe use disorder as they go down through here. And this slide, I don't know if it's going to be available for that, but it's worth taking a couple of minutes and just looking through that as it goes down. It's different for everyone, but there's a lot of common symptoms in here. Grandiose and aggressive behavior, lengthy intoxications, methamphetamine addicts use for 4 or 5 days. They're up for 4 or 5 days. Their brain starts to, you start seeing things out of the corner of your eyes, and you start to have psychosis. This is the kind of stuff that we're dealing with when we get down to the bottom here. And usually by then, they've worked their way out of the family and they've isolated themselves, because of guilt and shame, and they don't want to be around people because they've tried to hide it for so long. I don't know how many people I know I work with that run to the garage and take a quick belt and then run back in the house and tell their wife, no, I'm not drinking. And they try to get away with that, hide them in the back of the toilet tank, hide bottles outside. That's part of the whole deterioration as you go down through here. Yeah, you could flip that one.
Well, we talked a little bit about
Yeah.
this already.
Yeah.
I mean, just about the, how substance abuse makes mental health conditions worse. So it's kind of like the chicken or the egg, like what comes first, and the answer is both. Sometimes people start off with having a mental health condition, like depression, anxiety, PTSD, and then substance abuse becomes the way they cope, and it becomes worse. And sometimes substance abuse just starts experimentally, and then mental health conditions develop as a result. But usually you're not going to have one without the other. There's always usually anxiety and depression that go along with substance abuse. And so this one just talks about depression, like it gets worse, anxiety. If you're using substances, you have increased anxiety, and that includes nicotine, tobacco, and psychosis. Some substances induce psychotic symptoms, especially some of those drugs like sometimes marijuana can induce psychotic symptoms, and some of the K2, and what are some of the other ones that induce psychotic?
Oh, bath salts.
Those,
we won't get into those. It's not the bath salts that you put in your bathtub. It's a different kind of thing altogether.
Yeah. And then also with bipolar, post-traumatic stress disorder, the PTSD, and other mood or personality disorders. So we talked a little bit about this. I just said this before, using it as a self-medication, but also mental health can increase your want to cope with that particular mental health disorder. So treatment considerations, I'm going to let you talk about the integrated care. You talked a little bit about that anyway.
Yeah.
And I think that the important thing is if you're struggling with a mental health disorder or you're struggling with a substance use disorder, is to get an accurate diagnosis. And also you can't just take medication without working with somebody professionally as well. Working with a counselor, especially, and if it's a substance use disorder, having a mental health counselor that is experienced with substance use disorders is vital. And there's a lot of counselors out there that don't understand how those things work together. And I know that there was one counselor, I was working with a family, and he was just getting sober, and there's a lot of personality disorders that come out when you're using substances, and so the counselor was diagnosing him with a antisocial personality disorder, and there's no way you can diagnose those types of disorders when someone is actively using a drug, because it changes you. The drug changes you, it's not you. So having somebody that understands how those things work together is vital.
So I wait 6 months before I diagnose somebody, which is why I have to keep them for a long period of time. Because a lot of times, we stigmatize people by diagnosing them too soon with like borderline personality disorder or something like that, and then you're walking around with a loaded diagnoses, which is very stigmatizing. It makes you feel bad. I don't know how many people that I've had to reassess because they went to inpatient treatment and they had this laundry list of mental health disorders, and really they only have one. It's amazing. So I'm going to take you back 5 years. Okay, so because I believe in the power of connection, because I believe in working with people face to face, COVID happened. All right, and I'll never forget this, because that's why I wrote this second book, because I really, really try to keep things as simple as possible. I showed up down at the Pioneer Club, 1340 3rd Avenue Southeast, which was that's where I got sober, man, in 2007, and that was my place that I went to. The door was locked. They shut it down. And for a couple of seconds, I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? But I was running a treatment program at Recovery's Happening, and I was the treatment director there, and I got to make the decision to stay open. So I stayed open during COVID. Everybody else went to telehealth, and they closed down. Very controversial decision, but it was a beautiful thing, because I was able to connect with these people that they looked at it as a privilege to come in and be able to talk to people wearing masks. You know, we had the 6-foot lines out there. You know, it was a huge group room, and nobody got COVID. It was unbelievable, and I was able to stay open. And I did a little 5-year thing. So I interviewed them 5 years later, and how important that connection was during a time when everybody was told to isolate. We're going to pay. Imagine this. So I'm actively using drugs, and I'm told by the state to stay home, to not work, and we're going to pay you to do that. And I have nothing to do. I have no structure. And now all these liquor stores deliver. I'm glad I got sober when I did. They deliver right to your door. You don't have to do anything. You just have to pick up the phone and call them. And so a lot of people, even people that weren't struggling with addiction, mid-30s, mid-40s, were told by the Mayo Clinic to go work from home. So they were working from home and doing a lot of this stuff. And a lot of them started to do a little sippy. You know, and I ended up getting a lot of those people into programming that never had a problem with alcohol before, and then they got a DWI with their kids in the car. And so you start that. So all of that isolation, this was my test study. This was my research study, and to keep them long term. So in 2016, I'm in St. Peter, and I'm working at a place called New Beginnings, and it was a satellite office, which means it was me and one other person. And they said, Tim, you've been doing this a while. Do whatever you want. So I developed this long-term curriculum, long-term, year-long. And I still talk to some of those people today that were in that program. And this one guy said to a client that came in and said, I just can't get this. He said, come all the way in, sit all the way down, and stay. And I thought, oh my God, this is beautiful. So that's what I do. I work with people long-term. I've worked with people for 10, 12 years. Because listen, like Molly said, I might be in sustained full remission from alcohol and drug use, but my behaviors can change pretty fast depending on how I'm doing spiritually, and I want to talk about that a little bit because I think that's really, really important. Emotionally, physically, socially. I have a very spiritual group, which means we talk about God. And that's something that a lot of treatment centers shy away from. They don't want to talk about God. They don't want to talk about a higher power. You know, they want to do all cognitive behavioral therapy. I do that. That's all cog skills. But I have a very, very good mix of humans in my group that are all there on their own. And by gosh, spirituality has been something that's elevated their recovery. Meeting a different group of people outside of recovery. People that are, that don't have problems with substance use. That do know how to balance a schedule. That do know how to do those things that some of us struggle with. So I have a very, very elevated, high spiritual group. And Alcoholics Anonymous is all based on spirituality. All of it is. And that program's been around for 90 years. And I'm a big proponent of that as part of recovery. But then you have to have these other sections in there. And that's what I work on with people, is I work on that occupational wellness, financial wellness, environmental wellness, social wellness, spiritual wellness, emotional wellness, physical wellness, all of those things, so they can be a more complete human being, so they can get to the top of that Jelinek curve and get to, reaching their full potential. I'll never forget this. I was sitting at the North Star Bar, and I was 38 years old. And I'd go in there and I'd sit down, and the same guy sitting next to me every single Friday. And one guy told me the same story about 50 times. He's probably 55, 60 years old. He threw a no-hitter when he was 16 years old. And now we're looking 50 years later. And that's his big thing. That's all he's done. Threw a no-hitter when he was 16. But what have you done the last 40 years? I didn't want to be that person anymore. So I finally made the decision that I was going to go off and get some help. Because anytime probation or the judge pushed me, I rebelled. And that's part of that criminal thinking and a part of that thinking that you have to change. It's part of your brain that's ingrained, with that criminal thinking. So we have to change thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. But how do we do that? We do that with a good, healthy group of people. So this is all about connection. It's all about being connected. 90% of this is being connected to the right people. Because if you have a circle and you have acquaintances, friends, intimacy, what do you think's in the middle of that circle? Take a guess. You. I'm in the middle of that circle. I got to take care of me, and then I have to have people in that intimate side, and that's not just romantic relationships. Those are healthy people that challenge you. Mm-hmm. And if I have 2 or 3 of those, I'm gold. That means I can have 10 friends that can help me move if I need to move, which I'm doing right now. And then you have your acquaintances that you say hi to at work or whatever. But I have to have healthy people in that intimate circle because I can talk to them when I'm struggling. And you know what happens is normally people after 3 months, so this is the broken treatment system that I wrote about in my first book. I know guys been to 30 treatments. They just keep sending them. But they're all state insurance people, so we have to pay for that. So I would rather take somebody, keep them long term, maybe it cost them $6,000, rather than send them to inpatient 5 times, which would cost $150,000. And then I get to hang on to them, and I get to try to pull them back when they start to run. When that amygdala says, I'm done, I got to go, we try to just bring them back. And then the people in the group help as well. It's really a powerful dynamic. So when you can simplify it and say the opposite of addiction is connection, it kind of simplifies it to me. You got to be around healthy people. You have to. And that's the way it works for me and the way for the people that have got to buy in. Also, you peel the onion. Okay? So alcohol and drugs is a symptom of a much bigger problem. For me, it was neglect and abandonment when I was growing up. I didn't have a nurturing parents. They were absent. So I didn't have that. I had insecure attachment. I call it avoidant attachment for me today, is I don't trust. So I have a tough time letting people in. Because when I went for nurturing when I was young, I didn't get it. So then you find it in other things. And that's a huge part of when you get sober is let's fix that inner child a little bit, right? That's been hurt. That's a big part of it. A big part of recovery is peeling the onion. And guess what? It takes time. It takes 2 years for the brain to fully heal from fentanyl, methamphetamine, alcohol, benzodiazepines, cocaine, up to 2 years for the brain to heal. So why would you send somebody out after 90 days and say good luck? It's useless. It's a useless endeavor, So I keep them long time, and then they get to create a positive ripple effect and start helping other people. So that's how I do it, and that's why I work by myself, because I don't play well in the sandbox with others, because I have the way that I do it that I really truly believe in, and I've seen the results. And I don't see the results from these spin dries that they send people to every single time they have a relapse. It's a waste of time, and it becomes useless. It becomes 3 hots in a cot, but 3 really, really nice hots and a really, really nice place to sleep, But you're not learning anything more. Most of the guys can teach the stuff that I teach, but they don't apply it themselves. So peeling the onion takes time.
So family members, and Tim talked about this a little bit, is that when you're the family member of someone who has a mental health or issue or addiction problem, like the family struggles just as much, and so like when you're coping as a family member, the first thing you need to do is seek support, because we cannot do this on our own. And church is a great support system, and use each other. Find support systems out there. There's a lot of different like Al-Anon meetings and family support meetings and things like that. Find yourself, individual counseling even. But we all need support. We cannot do this on our own. We're not meant to do this on. We're not created to do the things on our own, and that's why community is so important. Set boundaries. And I think this is where we see the biggest issue is like we love our family members so much, and we do not want to, we want to help them. But sometimes we enable. And so setting those boundaries, you have to take care of yourself too. You cannot allow like somebody else to take advantage of you. And it's also not helping them either. So setting those boundaries, those healthy boundaries, it helps that person. And it helps you as well. You have to take care of yourself. It's so important. If we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't take care of others. I remember like when my kids were little, I would feel sometimes bad for going out and running and exercising and kind of, leaving them there. But I was like, I am not going to be a good mom if I don't take care of myself too. And stay the course, stay vigilant, stay on track, don't get sidetracked. Use whoever you need to help you. And spirituality. If we don't have God, I don't know how we can do this. We have a hope that people that don't believe in God don't have. And we have to lean on Jesus to help us, because like he's the only person that can help us in certain times. And I think that like what Tim was saying with his group, how spiritual it is, I don't know how you can get sober and stay sober if you don't have that higher power to look up to and ask for help from, because we're created by God, and we're meant to lean on him, and he always helps us when we lean on him. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I guess I'll go back to the self-care one. So the burnout level for addiction counselors, people that get in the field, is 3 years. And the reason that it's 3 years is because it's a very extremely difficult population to work with not a lot of success. Okay? And so you have to take care of yourself, and you can't take things personally. I used to go home and, somebody'd relapse, go back to jail or something, and I go home and what could I have done better? What could I have done better? And the bottom line is, when you're working 70 hours a week and you're pouring into these people every day, you're doing the best you can. And you have to be able to leave that at the door. Family members need self-care as well. Spa days, they need vacations, they need to be uplifted as well. And that's where that, part of that spirituality comes in. And then the endurance. I love that stay the course, because that's all about endurance. This is the tortoise and the hare fable. Anybody heard of the tortoise and the hare? So, they both take off at the same time, and it's a race, and the hare gets way out in front, takes a little nap. And here's this plodding, methodical turtle, slowly plodding away, and bypasses that hare. The arrogance, right? I'm a grinder, and I am a turtle. It's a slow process, but that's the endurance part. It's because I suffer from a chronic relapsing brain disease, that my brain tells me that I need to go back and do some coke and drink a few drinks because life's not good for me today. And I have to lean heavily then on my spirituality and self-care, which for me is the gym, my dog, tattoos, and music. And that's what I lean on for self-care. So yes, how to cope as a family member? Get involved and learn and educate yourself on this, because it's vital that you stay healthy. So when they are ready, you're ready to provide them with some resources or provide them with some hope yourself.
Okay, and so I think I just have one more slide, and I think this is really important. He wants us to ask for help. And I put some verses up there. I don't know if you can see them, but this is probably one of my favorites up there. As I lift my eyes up to the hills, from where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And the reason that I love that verse so much, I used to be a social worker in the emergency room, and this family came in, and they had just lost their husband and father to a car accident, and this priest I think he was from Ghana, came in, and all he did was sit and he read that verse. And it was so powerful, because when you really think about it, like, all we have to do is just ask for help, and because we cannot do this on our own. We cannot save other people. We have to, and God is the only one that can save anyone, right? And so we have to ask him for help, and we ask for intervention for our family members and loved ones. The righteous cry out, And the Lord hears them, he delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. And this goes for family members and for people who have mental health and addiction issues. And he hears us when we cry out to him, and he can save us. So do not fear, I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you out. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand, and cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. So, you know, when we're kind of spiritually down and we're feeling like we can't do anything, we know that he's here for us. But there's also so many community resources out there, like, you know, Tim and others that are there for that professional help as well. All right. Do you have anything else?
No, I think that's good.
Do you guys have any questions?
Oh, I'm sure they do.
Segue into questions.
Yeah.
Jump in. Oh, I think just talk loud.
Okay. Would you have any commentary, given the adolescents in the room, I think back to when I was younger, and we had DARE, we had the drug stuff that they went through and talked about.
Yeah.
But I do think, reading some literature lately, addictions to phones, food, sex, porn, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any commentary on that? I know you probably don't get into it.
We do.
No, we do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Digital
Do you have
minimal.
any comments on
Yeah.
that? For the adolescents, I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, digital minimalism is something I talk about a lot, the social media stuff and how we can get ensnared into that scrolling that you do. And how many hours people spend on their phones.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about digital minimalism and just cutting that out and adding things to it. You know, I'm old school, so I grew up and we didn't have any of that stuff. We went out and played till mom called us in for supper, and then we ate, and then we ran back out and played till it got dark. That's what we did. And now today, kids get home from school, and the first thing they do is they're on Facebook and they're on Instagram and TikTok, and they're doing all that stuff, and pretty soon that just gets away from you. So we talk about coping skills with that. The pornography is another big one for a lot of males that get into the church and struggle with that. And I think that, you know, it's okay to talk about that today. And I think a lot of times people go taboo. We can't talk about pornography because, oh my gosh, you know, it's such a terrible thing. But for people that are addicted to it, they need help with that. So you can use the same coping skills and cognitive skills to reduce that. You know, and reduce, so screen time, right? So 9:20 every Sunday, 9:20 a.m., I get a little reminder how many hours I spend on my screen per day for the week. You guys get that too?
No.
Yeah, so if it says 5 or 6 or 7 hours, look at that. That is 50 hours a week that you are spending on your phone. I mean, that is ridiculous. This is where the balance comes in. We talk about, you know, balancing our lives. And what is missing when you're putting 50 hours into your phone? You know, you're missing family time, you're missing recreation, you're missing hobbies, you're missing, you know, all of this important stuff. So yeah, we talk about that reduction and then coping skills to help with that, to deal with that. And young people, it's tough. So I'm a harm reduction guy. Reduce to get to that point. Because to tell somebody, hey, put your phone down for a week, impossible. It's not going to happen. But if I say, listen, when you see that thing that says 6 hours a day, try to get that down to 5. Try to just work on getting it down to 5. And that's harm reduction for me. You know, telling a kid to quit smoking pot or vaping or whatever, I'm all about reduction. Reducing the amount of times that you vape, reducing the amount of times that you use, and then see what you can fill that gap in with. Pornography is a lot harder. You know, but there's a new meeting. I can't remember. I just heard that there's a new meeting at one of the churches in town on Monday nights for men that struggle with pornography. And I was like really happy to hear that because I think it'll open up the door for people to have less shame. You know, shame is a huge issue when it comes to some of these addictions. Even a phone addiction, it's shame. And so we have to deal with healing the shame part of it too. And a lot of that, spiritual. It's a spiritual thing.
Well, and there's a lot of denial that goes along with it too, because you don't want to admit that you have a problem, and you want to just you want to think that you're smart enough that you can just put it down. But if you find yourself not able to do it when you tell yourself that you're going to do it and you can't, then it's becoming a problem. And that's what addiction is wanting to change and not being able to, and over and over and over again. Now, because they've designed the phones to be very, very addicting, and pornography on the phone is very easy to see, and so it's a lot harder for people to get away from that. And so it's all about, like, if you're finding that you have a problem, it's confessing that you have a problem, and it's finding that person that you can maybe confess to, and accountability. I know this one guy that says that, like, when his wife is out of town, he's like more tempted, and so he calls these two guys and says, like, my wife is out of town, and so if you call me in the morning, and he doesn't want to have to tell him that he messed up. So it's accountability.
Individual therapy
Yeah.
is kind of the answer to a lot of the shame part, where you can shut a door and you can sit down with somebody and know it's confidential, and you can start to share. Because a pain shared is a pain halved, and a lot of shame dies in that safe environment. So I would always say, listen, let the therapist help build SMART goals and do some of that cog work with them to reduce. And so that's where I think that's kind of the solution, I think, is to get them into a room where you can shut the door and talk about it. Because that shame is really, really a big deal. And denial's another big deal. If it says that I just did 4 hours a day on my phone for the last 7 days, that's 28 hours I've been on my phone. Now, is that a problem? Well, I do a lot of work stuff on my phone, but I could definitely reduce that. So that's kind of what we talk about, is just simply starting to reduce some of those issues so they don't become bigger problems, and then addressing them in individual therapy with assignments and homework you can do. Bring it back, talk to your therapist about that, because in a group it's hard. Like in a group of 20 people, and somebody says, yeah, a problem with porn, you know what I mean? There's people that might, judge that person, and that becomes, then they shut down. Then they're like, okay, well, I'm not gonna share that anymore, because people are laughing at me and everything else. So a lot of times the answer is individual therapy.
Yeah.
If I could just add a little comment, again, for adolescent purposes, there's a lot of things that are outside of drugs, screens, and all those things. There's Gamers Anonymous. There's literally groups that have discussions about their addiction to gaming.
Yes.
So that Xbox can become an addiction, right?
Absolutely,
I
yeah.
have a relative that was very addicted to working out, bodybuilding, to the point where it was kind of weird.
Yeah,
And
I bet.
they knew it was weird to work out 8 hours a day. I'm just saying, it applies to a lot of different
It
things.
does.
So keep that in mind as you're going through life.
Yep, absolutely.
It's easy to cross addict as well. So like, let's say somebody is an alcoholic and they've got a year clean from alcoholism, and they're doing their thing. It's easy to just flip over to do something else, and a lot of times those process addictions.
That was
It's
that case. Yeah.
Yes, it was gaming.
Alcohol to work,
Yes, or to workaholism.
Yes.
I mean, 70 hours a week of work is insane. But that's exactly what some people do, is they flip the switch, and that becomes a problem too, because again, you're neglecting those other things in your life that are important.
Yeah.
There's always stuff. Yeah.
Gambling. Yes.
Yes.
And eating disorders, anorexia, bulimia.
Yes. Yep. All process addictions, and it's that same mechanism in the brain that is hijacked, and you get these obsessive compulsive thoughts, and you're just like, you're not able to stop them on your own sometimes, and like that's when you need intervention. Gambling is more of an intermittent reward, so like you might not get the win every single time, but when you do, like a surge of dopamine releases, and you're like, okay, and it keeps you going. So it's kind of like how social media is too. Like, you not maybe always get the video that you like, but then all of a sudden you get one that's really funny, you keep on scrolling through it and you can't stop. I mean, some people will, I do this, I put limits on, and I try to adhere. It will say you've reached your limit for the day, but at least it gets you, like it, dings you, so you're like, oh gosh, I've been on this for 20 minutes.
I'm glad you brought up the eating disorder.
Yeah.
I really am.
I used
And
to take care of people in eating
Yes.
disorders.
Yes.
And the anorexic people, they destroy their brain cells.
Yes,
You know,
yep.
and they're never the same.
If you're not eating, you can't think
You don't get the
straight.
nutrition, and
No.
your
No,
electrolytes go out of whack, and you don't come back to where you were.
It's
Right.
hard, you know. You get people that come into into a treatment program and they've been using for a long, long time, and they're very frail. And what happens in 28 days is they just shove food at you, and then you gain this weight, and then they come out and they think they're fat, and they go, so I know how to lose this weight.
Yes.
Methamphetamine, because it's a stimulant, it makes us not eat. And then they get to the point where they get the eating disorder, and they look at themselves and they see a healthy person, or they see a fat person, when really they're just kind of dissolving right before our eyes. I have 4 of them that come to the same group, and they're thick as thieves, because it's almost like a competition. And all I can do for them, I just provide them unconditional love, and empathy and support, because you're right. It's hard for them. They're not going to listen to me, but I'm going to plant some seeds anyway, and give them some, keep them connected. So when they are ready to change, if they are, then we're there for them to support them. But the eating disorder is a very common cross addiction
Yes, it is.
when people
Yeah.
get sober.
yeah, bulimia is very addicting, yeah.
Yeah, couple more questions?
Yeah.
A quick one. Is alcoholism, we haven't addressed anything about genetics. Are some people born with a weakness in that part of the brain
Yeah.
that they're more subject to that?
Yes.
Yes
Yes.
or no?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
And the environment plays a big part in that as well. That's why it becomes
Yep.
a generational thing. Like dad, grandpa, great grandpa, the alcoholism just runs right in the family. And it's probably, it's partly genetics, yes. It's also partly the environment they grow up in. Dad gave me a beer when I was 5 years old.
And poor choices?
And poor choices, yeah.
Yep.
And your role models are the ones that you look up to, and if they're not doing well, that's what we see and that's what we know.
Yeah.
So you're right, that's a good question.
Yes. It's probably about 50%.
Tim and Molly can stay for a few minutes. I know it's time to move on to other things, but we thank you all for coming. A couple of things. I put a sign-up sheet outside, and if any of you would like the slides or would like information, please just put your name and email or something, because Tim and Molly have agreed to share those. November 16th, we're having our next health forum. It is on mental health and illness. And it's segued from what Tim and Molly have said today. So hopefully a lot of you can come to that. It's again for youth and adults. So thank you all coming, for
Yeah.
the kids coming. It's great to have you young adults. And we thank you so much.
Yeah,